On behalf of ViacomCBS and the ViacomCBS Veterans Network, welcome to our virtual panel series, De-stigmatizing Mental Health in the Military Community. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are so fortunate to be joined by a very special and world-class panel this evening. It is an absolute honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to be together this evening. At ViacomCBS, we never forget our obligation to the more than 22 million living veterans in the United States, especially the nearly 2.6 million who nobly answered the call of service after the events of September 11th. They and their families have faced significant challenges as they transition back to civilian life. The ViacomCBS Veterans Network is proud to continue the great legacy of those who came before us, and in ways big and small to do what the company has always done by making an unwavering commitment to assist our nation's veterans and their families. We are here to support their mission and your mission. Every day, it's ViacomCBS is Veterans Day. This is National Mental Health Awareness Month, and today is National Mental Health Action Day. And in less than 2 weeks, we will celebrate Memorial Day. So it is very fitting that we would take this opportunity today to have this discussion about the importance of dealing with and caring for those who suffer from the invisible wounds of war. Judging from our special guests and an amazing panel, I know that we will be tremendously inspired and be moved to action. It gives me great pleasure to welcome two leaders, both leaders who were distinguished themselves in the military and in combat, but now continuing that service as they serve those who have served our nation. I'd like to introduce General Mike Linnington, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Wounded Warrior Project, where he brings 35 years of his military and combat leadership experience to the amazing work that the Wounded Warrior Project does, providing life-changing and critical care to wounded veterans and their families when they return from combat. Mike and the Wounded Warrior Project team are tirelessly dedicated to providing the necessary physical and mental health services, as well as economic empowerment engagement programs to the Wounded Warrior population. And I can say this, no one honors that sacred call better. We also welcome General Jack Hammond, who is the Executive Director of Project Homebase, which is a foundation that is a joint venture with the Red Sox Foundation and the Massachusetts General Hospital Program. And they are dedicated to healing the visible wounds of war affecting our service members, veterans and their families, including post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain and traumatic brain injury. It's a tremendously amazing organization that provides unique intensive care programs, fitness and wellness programs, as well as education and research. General Linnington brings his over 30-year military career, both as a combat leader and now in his role in the not-for-profit community serving our veterans to this job. General Linnington, I hand it over to you. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Rich, and thanks for ViacomCBS for hosting such an important discussion. And like Army Ranger Rich Jones, I'm truly honored to be a part of today's Mental Health Action Day panel discussion with so many exceptional, inspirational veterans. Many Americans, especially veterans, can be resistant to seeking care, often with serious consequences. And that's why Wounded Warrior Project, an organization I'm privileged to be a part of, is committed to ensuring veterans have access to quality physical and mental health care through a variety of programs and services we offer to thousands of wounded warriors. One of the programs through which we offer support is the Warrior Care Network, a partnership between Wounded Warrior Project and 4 world-class academic medical centers, UCLA in California, Rush University in Chicago, Emory Health in Atlanta, and Massachusetts General in Boston. A partnership that delivers life-changing mental health therapy to veterans in need. The warriors participating in the Warrior Care Network do so at no cost to themselves or their families, because we believe they pay their dues in service to our country. What sets the Warrior Care Network apart from other programs is that a year's worth of therapy is delivered within 2 or 3 weeks through the Intensive Outpatient Program, or IOP, at each of the 4 locations, and that therapy includes families as well. Those who have been through the IOP tell me it works, changes lives, helps families, and restores hope. And that's precisely why I'm honored to have with me tonight Jack Hammond from Massachusetts General Home Base Program. Jack is an Army battle buddy and a good friend, and he's the executive director at Home Base. Our 2 organizations work closely together to provide quality care to veterans through the Warrior Care Network. Jack, over to you, my friend.
Thanks, General Linnington. As always, it's always a privilege to share a Zoom with you. And I'd like to add my thanks to Viacom veterans and MTV for hosting this important event. And also add a special thanks to the amazing panelists we have today. Incredible stories of incredible people with amazing perseverance and grit. As Rich mentioned, Home Base is a partnership between the Red Sox and MGH. And through that program, we're able to draw upon some of the best clinical resources in the world. We draw all our faculty and staff from the Harvard Medical School, Mass General faculty. And through that work and through these amazing clinicians, we're able to design and innovate and implement cutting edge, innovative new programs that previously didn't exist, like the intensive clinical program that General Linnington spoke about a minute ago. Thousands of folks have come through Home Base from all across the country. And that's the message to you all is it doesn't matter where you live in the country and frankly, anywhere in the world. If you need our help, we will fly you to Boston or any of our other 3 sites, give you the care you need, take care of all the air travel, food, housing, all of that's taken care of, along with world-class care at each of these 4 sites. In addition, Home Base offers the only clinical program designed specifically for the families of our fallen in partnership with an organization called TAPS, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. And we've created a separate program for our special operations forces, specifically for the traumatic brain injuries many of them have sustained. For those unfamiliar, based on the disproportionate use of our special operations team members, Army Rangers, Delta Force members, Green Berets. They've had a 300% increase in suicide over the last couple of years, and they have a disproportionate number of brain injuries associated with the concussive events of their training, and oftentimes 17 to 20 deployments, 5,000 parachute jumps, you name it. It is a true honor and pleasure to do that work each day with an amazing team and partners like Wounded Warrior. We could not do what we do without their support, partnership, and friendship. Wounded Warrior has access to every veteran in the United States and is able to connect them to the care with us. So without further ado, I think it's time to get on to the real platform, the warriors and the clinicians involved with this. But before we do that, I'd like to turn the mic over to Anisha from Bravo Sierra, who's going to lead us in a mental health activity to kick off our discussion. So over to you, Anisha.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I am truly honored and privileged to be here on this platform and to be representing Bravo Sierra. If you can look in your chat, there has been a SMART Goals worksheet that has been dropped in there. If you can open that, that would be great. So myself currently, I just got out of the Marine Corps, served 10 years as a combat photographer. So I know about limiting chaos. I know about the transition. I know some of the difficulties that we as service members face while transitioning out of the military and trying to find our way and find our path. I've learned that this SMART Goals worksheet has helped me in my transitioning and leading me down the path that I need and understanding how this can limit the chaos in my life. If you are able to see the SMART worksheet, it talks about SMART goals, setting SMART goals. SMART goals provide explicit direction towards intended outcomes, specifically naming who is acting as the reached upon agreement, what are you doing, the framework of the goal. It's really breaking it down so it alleviates some of the stress of setting goals. We all know how important setting goals can be and how amazing it can feel to accomplish those goals. When we're setting SMART goals and we're setting goals in our life, we want to make sure that we are specific. The S in SMART stands for specific. You want to devise the strategy, be straightforward. What is your goal? Say my goal is to work out more. With COVID going on, we've all been home. We've had the stresses of being home. I want to work out more. So working out more is a goal. It's setting a goal, but be specific with your goal. I want to work out Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 7 a.m. My intended purpose for this is to lose 15 pounds. You next want to set measurable goals. The M in SMART is for measurable. How are you going to measure those goals? How are they going to be applied? Measuring those goals can be marking off on your calendar, making sure that you've got it there in front of you. We need visual representation to show us where we stand. How are we accomplishing these goals? If I walk by a calendar every day and I see Mondays marked off, but I haven't marked off Wednesday, I know that I need to get in there. I know that I need to get into the grind. I know I've set these goals, and this is how I'm going to obtain them, by keeping myself accountable. A is for achievable. You want to set achievable goals. How are you going to achieve them? Do you have the right resources to achieve your goals? If not, how can you reach those resources? How can you get those resources? And we have some amazing panelists here who have some amazing resources as well. Hire a coach, an accountability partner. I think too many times as a military service member, we're afraid to reach out. We're afraid to ask for help. We're afraid to have that partner who's going to hold us accountable, because that means we have to hold ourselves accountable. What is your motivation for this goal? My motivation for this goal is I want to live a healthy, long-lasting life. I want to see my children grow up. I want to see their children grow up. We understand that a lot of the COVID issues that we've been having have been from underlining issues. What can we do to prevent those? Being able to reach out for help is huge, and having someone who's there to help you along that is going to be a great benefit for you, and holding yourself accountable. The R in your SMART goals is relevant. How is this relevant? What is this relevant to now? I kind of touched on that on the last, being achievable, but it's relevant to your health. It's relevant to your mental health. When you feel good physically, you can feel good mentally, and vice versa. When you feel good mentally, you can feel good physically, and you want to get out there and you want to push through things. When you're unhealthy mentally, when you're unhealthy within your body, it leads you down a path that can be destructive. So it's good to have your mental health intact and your physical health intact, and they both do tie hand in hand. You also want to be time bound. So the T in SMART in your SMART goals is time bound. You want to set those realistic goals, but you also want to give yourself a hard timeline. So say I want to set these goals. I have this goal. I want to work out more. I want to work out Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I want to work out on 7 a.m. What is the goal that I'm trying to reach? So the time bound, in 30 days, in 60 days, in 90 days. Have those check-in periods. Have those times where you come back, you say, hey, this is my realistic goal. This is my 30-day check-in, my 60-day check-in, and my 90-day check-in. When you have time-bound goals, it holds you to a standard. We all understand those military timelines, those military guidelines, and setting a goal, and how important it is to set those goals, be realistic with your goals, have them be measurable, and to be extremely specific with what it is that you want. When you are specific, when you can measure your goals, they become more achievable. You become mentally involved. You want to achieve those goals, and they're just there for you. SMART goals. It's a key for me. It has helped me through a lot of my transition, not just as a fitness goal, but other goals that I have in life too, with education and giving back to my community. So SMART goals are important. So I leave you this with limiting chaos in your daily routine. Have a routine, schedule your day, set reminders, be able to take off one hat and put on another, be willing to adapt. We all know that. Control what you can control. And the last thing that I'll leave you with is one of my favorite sayings that I've learned this week. You have to be able to delegate to elevate. Back to you, Rich.
Take action. So nothing better to charge us with action than some goals. So thank you, and thank you for all that Bravo Sierra does in support of our nation's veterans. As I mentioned earlier, we have an amazing panel. We're very, very, very fortunate to have an amazing panel here today. But equally, we are equally fortunate to have an amazing moderator. It gives me great pleasure to introduce an Emmy Award winner and a dear friend to the ViacomCBS Veterans Network, Jim Axelrod. No more passionate supporter of the military and veteran community than Jim. Jim is the senior national correspondent for CBS News, reporting for CBS This Morning, the CBS Evening News, CBS Sunday Morning, and other CBS News broadcasts and special events. A 25-year veteran of CBS News, Jim has covered the globe as a dedicated journalist, including extensive time embedded with combat forces in both Iraq and Afghanistan. In fact, in 2003, Jim was the first television journalist to report live from Baghdad's Saddam International Airport immediately after it fell to US troops. His live coverage of the US Army firing artillery rounds into Iraqi positions was the first to be broadcast by a reporter embedded with troops engaged in combat. As a testament to his commitment, Jim was the last journalist to leave Iraq when US forces departed in December of 2011. For his excellence and great commitment to journalism and the search for truth, Jim has been honored as the recipient of the Peabody Award, the Edward R. Morrow Award, the DuPont Columbia Silver Baton, and several Emmy Awards. And let me say this, Jim's skill as a journalist is only exceeded by his devotion and service to our nation's military and veterans and their family. And we are so proud of all that he does and are so appreciative that he will be able to join us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incomparable Jim Axelrod.
Rich, thank you so much. That is very humbling to hear from you, and I'm grateful for those words. You know, every time that I'm able to be involved with something that the ViacomCBS Veterans Network is doing, I'm left with this just a remarkable feeling of being able to, in some very small way, being able to contribute to support a group that works to support the men and women our country owes such an enormous debt to. Tonight's topic is especially meaningful to me, de-stigmatizing mental health in the military community. You know, I, as you mentioned, saw some combat up close, and I just remember thinking, these men and women who are serving, the invisible wounds that they're suffering, how are they going to be dealt with when they come home? So let's have a conversation about the stigmatization that has taken place and what's being dealt to deal with that right now, a conversation that's going to take place with this all-star panel that we have assembled here. Let me begin with a couple of introductions. First off, J.R. Martinez is with us tonight. Now, you may know him as the winner of Dancing with the Stars season 13, but he is, of course, much more than that. He's an Army vet, he's a burn survivor, he's an actor, motivational speaker, he's a best-selling author. JR is all about spreading a message of optimism and resilience, and we'll look forward to his take on this very important issue. Tanya Oxendine, after 30 years in the Army, she retired as a command sergeant major, which, as we know, is an enormous feat. But that's really when she began to confront some issues. It was in her retirement, PTSD, depression, anxiety. Even as she built this new career as a civilian, she was struggling with her mental health, and regularly, as she will talk about, had some suicidal thoughts. Tanya's story is one of learning how to ask for help, such an important skill. And then, because she's all about duty and accountability, that's just really the story of her adult life, using what she learned to help others. As the founder of WWP Talk, a free mental health phone and support line. Tanya, thanks for being with us. We're lucky to have Justin Constantine with us tonight as well. Man, oh man, oh man, you could look up resilience in the dictionary and just leave it at a picture of Justin. No other definition needed. Now, he was a Marine, shot in the head by a sniper in Iraq, and first thought to have died. He won the Purple Heart, among many other commendations. He retired as a lieutenant colonel and embarked on a successful career after retiring from the service, writing and lecturing on leadership. But he wasn't done yet. In February of 2020, he was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. After a year of massive change in terms of health and wellness, he is now healthier than he's ever been. He's also in a position to offer unique insight on dealing with the heavy lift of maintaining mental health in the face of adversity. So Justin, thank you. Dr. Alexis Iaccarino is a board-certified physiatrist who has a subspecialty training in brain injury medicine. For the last 5 years, she's worked with the home-based team that combines comprehensive evidence-based brain injury care to veterans. She'll be telling us all about that as our conversation gets underway. Doctor, thank you so much. And finally, we have Steve Giblin with us. Steve served for 28 years in the United States Navy, 26 of those years as a Navy SEAL. He conducted special ops in Europe, Central America, the Pacific and Mediterranean theaters, Africa, and the Middle East, all of which means Steve has, in addition to remarkable, uncommon valor, some insight into the mental health issues involved in facing significant threats for years and years and years. So thank you to Steve and for all of us for being here tonight to speak with us. All right, we got a lot of ground to cover. Tanya, I want to start with you. And I want to talk to you about this process after you retired. When you began to confront your mental health challenges, Tanya, could you tell me a little bit about that, exactly what you were dealing with and how you reached the understanding that A, you needed help, and where were you going to find your help?
Hi, Jim. Thank you for that great introduction. I appreciate it. In 2012, when I returned from deployment, I was struggling. That last deployment was pretty tough in Afghanistan. So just really, really struggling. And one day in my office in Crystal City in Arlington, Virginia, just looking out the window, like I said, I had these suicide thoughts, and I just thought to myself, if I were to jump out this window and kill myself, what type of legacy, what type of example would I be setting for my 2 adult sons? And just like now, I just get overwhelmed with thinking about that. And that's why I think it's so important to share these stories and tell about the mental illness. And I thought that everything I thought about was not good. It was not a good example that I would be setting. So I told my fellow colleagues, I said, I'll be back. I have an appointment. And I went straight to Fort Belvoir and sought mental health.
How hard was that for you to say, all right, I'm a strong woman, a veteran, somebody who's demonstrated valor and strength, and now I need help? How hard was that?
It was extremely difficult. Like I said, the last deployment, it was just really tough, not just for myself, but a lot of my soldiers and the chain of command. I was afraid. I felt like I would not be able to lead anymore. I felt like people would judge me. I felt like I would be harassed. I felt weak, but I had to do it. I had to do it for my sons. I had to do it for the future. So to seek mental help.
It would have been easy if you break your arm, you get in a cast, everyone knows you broke your arm. This is different. Was it the stigma of it's not a broken arm? It's actually an issue with my emotions, with my head, with my mental health. Was that stigma a factor for you?
It absolutely was a factor in me, because the stigma surrounding mental illness, it prevents us from getting help, and I will say this, I hope not to offend anyone, especially in the Black community. We've heard all these different, implications of the crazy, to talk about your crazy uncle, or, it leads that you're a bad person, that, it's surrounded with violence. Again, it's shameful, all these different type beliefs. So it was very difficult to do that. But I had to know, my goal was to understand and know that I did need the help.
That's a really interesting perspective. I think we only get better to the degree to which we can talk about these things in unvarnished terms. JR, 3 years in a burn center, you're dealing with a lot of physical issues. I'm curious as you began to confront the emotional issues, JR, what kind of stigma you felt?
Jim, again, I want to echo Tanya and just say thank you for the introduction. Again, I want to thank everyone for inviting me to be a part of this panel, Movember as well, for all the great work that they're doing. You know, Jim, to your question, I think what was incredibly challenging for me, I was 19 years old and my identities were taken away from me. The identity that I knew for 19 years of my life, meaning my physical appearance, and also the identity that I was starting to create for myself of being a young man wearing the uniform, of being of service, of having a purpose. And then suddenly I'm told that this is the way I'm going to look for the rest of my life. Also, I'm not going to be able to wear that uniform. And I started plotting and planning of goals and schools that I wanted to go to. I wanted to be this highly decorated soldier. But I also think it's incredibly important to echo what Tanya was alluding to. You know, I am Hispanic. My family's from Central America. And I can tell you culturally, it's not something that we really talk about. It's not something that we're educated on. And so for me, I had to get over this element of, I had to learn how to deal with, I'm not going to say get over, but I had to learn how to deal and make space for this new identity and for the way that I was going to allow myself to be embraced and received by the community that didn't know how to communicate with me. So it took, honestly, it took me doing all of the work in order for me to make this an approachable topic and making myself an approachable individual to everybody else.
It strikes me you were leading almost this bifurcated existence of recovery so that physically people could say, okay, I see he was involved in something in his service, but then there's the invisible scars.
Yeah.
So can you compare for me the difference in terms of healing physically and healing emotionally?
It was easy to recover physically. And I know that people listening to that are looking at me and saying, wait, what are you talking about? I'm sure Justin could probably allude to this as well, and anybody else that's listening. But it was easy for me to physically just go to therapy and to have the surgery and to just recover and do what I needed to do, take a little bit of time off. It was difficult for me to actually sit down and talk about my feelings, my emotions, what the challenges were that I was feeling and I was dealing with. When I got out of the military at 22 years old, I could tell you that I would sit in my room staring out the window and I would just cry by myself because I just felt incredibly isolated. And I remember that it wasn't until I was 24 years old, so almost 2.5 years after I got out of the military, my best friend, who was a 20-year Air Force veteran, is 17 years older than me at the time, sat me down in the passenger seat of his car, Jim, and he told me that I needed to cry. And here I am, 24 years old. I'm looking at him like, what are you talking about? I need to cry. And he said, you need to cry because internally, emotionally, and mentally, you have not healed and the scars are still prevalent. And that was the first time I allowed myself to cry in the presence of somebody else. And without it necessarily being initiated by alcohol. You know, yeah, I had moments where I was 22, 23, 24 years old, and I would drink because that was my way of coping, and then I would cry. But then people at that point are not necessarily paying attention to me. That was the first time I was able to cry in a safe environment where I didn't have any alcohol or anything in my system. And let me tell you the impact and the power of that moment. That my best friend Dan allowed me to feel like I was in a safe space. Every conversation that we had prior to that moment, he would always end with "I love you" to me. I would always respond with him, all right, cool, I'll talk to you later. I never responded with the "I love you" because one, that wasn't something I was conditioned and trained on how to do. We as men aren't necessarily taught how to tell another man, I love you, in the same way that I can look at my wife and say, I love you. I mean it, it's just two different types of love, but it's the same thing. The next day when he and I were about to part ways, I was the first one to look at him in the eye and say, I love you, because I allowed myself to be vulnerable, but he encouraged me and he created this safe space for me. And Jim, it was from that moment that I really felt, I truly believe that's when I started to live. Prior to that, I was being content with being alive. My life changed from that moment.
Sounds to me like among the many powerful takeaways from listening to you, JR, stigma is certainly something for those who are producing it to examine. But you know what? For the individual, nobody can be stigmatized who doesn't care what anybody else thinks. If you know in your heart the right thing to do is to tell somebody you love them and to cry, then you can't be stigmatized. I think it's very important. We'll circle back to this in a second. Dr. Iaccarino, I want to bring you in here and tell us about the brain and trauma, doctor. There's a physical component to mental health, the neuroplasticity of the brain. I know all of that. So does trauma actually change the physical composition of the brain, doctor?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. And thanks so much for having me here. I am truly humbled to be among this group. So, you know, the brain is both the organ of thinking and cognition. It controls our motor functions and it controls our emotions, right? So while we used to think as mental health as one bucket, and perhaps thinking and cognition as a bucket, and then perhaps our physical, or what we might think of as our below the neck health as a bucket, it's actually much more connected than that. So we know through good science that if somebody's having a mental health difficulty, it's going to affect their physical health. It's going to affect their cognition. We see it commonly in things like gastrointestinal upset, right? Skin conditions, risk factor for cardiovascular disease, right? So this just isn't about feeling sad or having exposure to psychological trauma, right? It's really a focus on the entire well-being, right? And traumatic brain injury occurs often at the same exact time as a highly emotional, stressful scenario. So these injuries are occurring together to the same organ, and they're often happening repetitively in a short period of time. And that can be create a very complex picture. We have to treat a whole person. And that's why we've developed these comprehensive programs to really try to get at treating the whole person, not just the mental health condition.
So when I came back from being embedded the first time in 2003, and I was just a civilian, I was just watching and reporting, but I didn't have, and I don't come from a long line of brave people, let me tell you, but I came home and I was having a lot of trouble. I'd seen some stuff and been in some situations that were difficult. And a trauma psychiatrist that I saw said to me, look, your brain actually changes shape as a response to trauma. And it's just going to take a while for it to sort of return to the state that it was. The reason I bring this up is in terms of assessing stigma, we sometimes need to understand that men and women who come home with PTSD are coming home with there's a physical component to what they're dealing with. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's absolutely true, Jim. So, you know, there are chemical changes that are happening on the brain in response to seeing or experiencing psychological trauma, right? We have to think about it like treating our blood pressure or our cholesterol, right? These are actual physiologic responses. This is not something that a person can will themselves out of, right? There has been a change. And we need to address that and think of it truly like any other physiologic or physical injury, because that's exactly what it is. It's an organ that's been traumatized, and we have to treat it that way.
I think this is such an important point among the sort of takeaways that I want to underscore with a nice thick black marker tonight is what you're saying, Doctor, which is that the injuries people suffer in a sort of PTSD or related type of capacity are no different than other physical injuries. And you wouldn't stigmatize a broken arm, as I said. So really important point. I just want to move on to Justin very quickly because Justin, it's always a pleasure to talk to you and it's always inspirational to talk to you. Why do you think there's stigma in the military community, Justin, in terms of dealing with the mental health issues?
Well, thank you, Jim. And I just want to, before I start talking, I just want to explain I had some oral reconstructive surgery a week ago. So there's still a lot of hardware in my mouth, but it just goes to show this is related to my being shot 15 years ago, how long some of our wounded warriors are still undergoing care. But hopefully you can understand me just fine.
Gotcha perfectly.
Okay, great. And so your question is about why does it exist? I will say, I believe it has changed over time. I know that when I went and spoke at the Marine Corps Command of South College, probably in 2008, about PTSD. And I was very, just like JR, like I want to spread a message out there, let people know, ask for help, it's okay, just like Tanya, seek out that help. That wasn't a popular opinion back then. In fact, some other officers more senior than I was came up to me and said, I don't believe know PTSD. I don't think that's true. I don't know how they could think that. Maybe they had not deployed, or I don't know what it was. I do think a lot of steps of our military and our nonprofits, like Wounded Warrior Project, that support our military, have really changed the narrative. But even so, I think we are a macho culture, and asking for help can be difficult. And people, I even see, as a former lawyer, I used to see where someone had been a really good Marine, they would come back, they would get in trouble. To me, it was obvious because of what they had gone through, and they would be punished and kicked out instead of leadership wrapping their arms around them and supporting them holistically. And if that's the mentality coming from the top, why would you go seek services if you know that you may be drowned out, or you may not be able to go on that next deployment with your friends, or you might, there are also some lists out there that if you have PTSD, you can't pass the security clearance. All that's false. And there's some other lists out there that they're just repeated throughout the service. So it's unfortunate. I will say I do think a lot of progress has been made.
What do you think I always think if there's one thing I could wish upon the world, it would be compassion, more compassion, so that instead of what's wrong with this guy, what's wrong with this woman, how do we help, right? Especially someone who is given, every veteran is given at the office. Do you feel we are in the process of injecting more compassion into the process of assessing the wounded warriors who come home and giving them what they need? And what steps do we need to take to get where we should be?
I wouldn't say that we've reached a great level of compassion. I think some have. I don't think as a whole, because I don't think as a country we have. I think, if we look at statistics, we know that PTSD and traumatic brain injury are much more common in the civilian world than the military, from car accidents and sexual assault, natural disasters. But still, as you said earlier, you break an arm, you go to the hospital. Mental health, no one wants to talk about it. A little bit more now, but I do think to the point where on some bases they had people were just so scared of seeing going into the building to take a test. So I wish that, like you, that no one thought if you were seeking help for PTSD, it wasn't part of your overall body, making yourself stronger so you could fill the mission and be part of the solution that we're all pushing towards. So I don't think we've reached that level of compassion. I do hope, as a younger generation who has deployed and is now in more levels of leadership, has a much better understanding of their feelings and compassion to their fellow soldiers and Marines as we push forward. That will change.
Steve Giblin, let me get your take on this notion that stigma only exists because a culture is complicit in allowing it. What's your experience been as you've transitioned into civilian life, and what's your take on these issues?
Thanks, Jim. Like Lieutenant Colonel was saying just now, culturally, he came from the culture of the Marine Corps. I came from a culture of special operations, and I can't think of a more AAA and, man's world than being in special operations. And, the stigma is real with PTSD, and still to this day, having these guarded conversations with, former teammates, and we're all retired now. And, one of us might awkwardly bring up PTSD, and it's tough. It really is. And it's something even tougher to accept. I spent a career going through stress inoculation. The training that's designed to make us stronger in combat situations. And, when the stuff really hits the fan, you're prepared for it. Well, a year before I retired, that's when things started hitting me in reverse. The rage, the shame, anxiety, hypervigilance. And I was in total denial that it was happening to me. And when I retired in 2009, I thought it would just go away. I thought it would just disappear. And, hey, I'll fix myself, and, things will be okay.
And I think you can understand, or people should understand, if we are going to try to solve the problem, what the roots are, that this psychology or this orientation is literally the difference between life and death. While you're in active service, you must shut it out. There is no room
Absolutely.
for, right? I mean, and so that's
Yes.
one of my closest friends who I met in Iraq is an infantry commander. He was a colonel. He's the biggest, toughest guy I've ever met in my life. We were at a family party in my house. Somebody dropped some plates, and this guy, 6'3", 240 pounds, was on his stomach in my kitchen. And somebody came in and said, "You better go get Mo." And I went in, and he was laid out because somebody had dropped some dishes. And he had 5 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, just the best of the best we have. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, no one understands what these people are suffering with. So how do you take that philosophy and psychology that allowed you to survive for 26 years as a SEAL and then suddenly be like, all right, I want to deal with, whatever I may have accumulated?
I had a couple of incidences where my rage took over, and I couldn't hear my wife begging me to not do something. And it finally got to a point where she just confronted me and said, "We've got some issues, and it's you, and you need to get some help." And that was really hard. That was tough. The love of my life telling me that, we were in trouble. And then when we were at home base and she was there for the weekend, we were doing the couples therapy and stuff, and we were in the group setting. And to hear her say that, she felt like she was always walking on eggshells around me. Again, shame came back, but in a different way. That just the mere fact that I was making my wife feel the way that she was feeling. So getting that help, it's usually going to be somebody else that recognizes what's going on, and they convince you to go get the help.
Yeah, if you're lucky, you have someone like that in your
Hopefully,
life. And
yes.
so,
Yes.
first of all, let me just say thank you to you for sharing. It's never easy, but it is so helpful to anyone watching to say, well, if this guy, can sort of open up to it, then I can. So I just want to say thank you to you and everybody else for talking. Now, Tanya, I'm going to go back to you for a second. If I make you the queen of the world and give you a magic wand you can wave, how do you reduce stigma about dealing with mental health issues for veterans?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, how to reduce the stigma is exactly what we're doing now. We're sharing our stories, platforms like WWP and Viacom to put this information out and to talk about it more, because I feel the more I share my story, the more others are likely to view their illnesses or their conditions as treatable, rather than it being a burden or, a shameful diagnosis.
I think that's really important. Talking is so key. JR, I make you king of the world and give you that same magic wand. What are you doing? You already are the king of the world. What are you going to do?
I would try to figure out, the counter to happy wife, happy life. Like, what's the thing for me? My wife is always looking at me. She's like, happy wife, happy life. And I'm like, what about me? What's the thing for me? What's the thing for the guys? But no, in all seriousness, Jim, I think for me, it would be, I just want to encourage more individuals. When you talk to Steve about how to have people, you talked about that story about your buddy in the kitchen. I think people have to just think about it this way, right? Like, because the military is this other world, and unless you have a direct connection, like you alluded to, Jim, not having anybody in your family. I mean, you actually experienced it. You went overseas. You saw not only your own experience, but what other veterans are dealing with. But so many civilians refer to the military as that over there.
That's right.
And I think what we have to do is kind of take that world and bring it and really look at it a micro. I mean, how many times do people get into car accidents in our community? How many times do people lose their jobs? How many times do people lose a child, develop cancer? People's identities immediately shift, right? Like, they're suddenly this for so long, and now they're no longer that. And it lives with them until they can actually go and get the help and get the proper help. And I think it's so important what Steve talked about, his wife. I mean, I applaud his wife so much, because there's a lot of people that are around service members and veterans that aren't going to dive in and say, hey, there's something going on and we got to sit here and talk about it, but we're all going to figure this out together. There's a lot of family members that don't have the tools as well. So I think the big, like Tanya is saying, is I want more veterans to come out and talk about their experience. I want more platforms to encourage more people, more veterans and more civilians on the same panel, and just find this cross-sectionality that exists with, man, it's not the same. I didn't develop my trauma in the same way that you did, and I'm not comparing it. However, when this happens, I feel the same thing that you feel. Oh, wow, there's some relatability right there. And so we're, instead of thinking of it on this larger scale, we're bringing it very much to this micro level where we can all feel and touch and understand. And I think from that is where compassion comes.
So we're not talking past each other. Instead, we're on a search for common ground. Let's stay with this theme, Justin. And you tell me, who was the person in your life who may have suggested to you, hey, bud, you've been through a lot, and I'm seeing some things that need some addressing?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I just want to say I already learned a lot from everyone on this panel, so I think it's fantastic. I was similar to Steve in that my wife identified to me I may have PTSD. She had some training in it because she was a teacher at inner city schools, and she had training on PTSD and recognized it. I didn't have a hang up on seeking treatment for whatever reason, maybe because I was in the reserves or at that point. But I ended up going for 18 months to a program called Juvenile, where weekly one-on-one hour-long sessions with a psychologist. The best decision I could ever make. I just think a lot of people don't know about these opportunities. They're not aware of it. And so if Gaia had said that to me and I didn't know about Juvenile, or I didn't know about We Warrior Project, so what? I had this information. Yeah, I'm not sure. I was lucky to have someone who pointed it out to me.
Doctor, what are you taking in as you're listening to all this?
Well, I am once again just extremely humbled. I think as a civilian, I think we don't have a good understanding of what the sacrifices that our military service members make for each of us. And so I'm reminded of that. I think the other thing, though, that I'm really taking in from this panel is hope, because I'm looking at a group of people who are coming out the other side. At least that's how it seems. And I think that speaks to the fact that this is treatable. Right? Sometimes people don't want to come forward because they think, well, what's that going to do? Right? Why am I going to bring up all this pent up or prior trauma? And that's because it can get better.
Yeah.
Right? You mentioned, Jim, neuroplasticity, which is this idea, right, that the brain is resilient, right? That it can overcome and adapt. and recover, really. So, and I think we see that every day at home base. And we're so grateful to see that, and for the work that patients are willing to do, that therapists are willing to do. This is something that it's not easy, very hard, but it can get better.
It's
And people
such
do
a,
come out the other side.
the way it had been explained to me again, I mean, and my mother is a therapist, and I got home and I was behaving in a horrendous way, and all I did was watch and report. I can't imagine the men and women who are fighting. But I finally decided, and I was like, I don't need any help. I'm fine. I'm fine. And my wife was like, not really, dude. So when I went off to talk to someone, it was explained to me that imagine you are chewing a stick of gum that has really potent flavors, that's like really bad taste. The only thing you can do is keep chewing that gum until the flavor's gone. And that was the way trauma was explained to me. You got to keep talking. You got to keep chew that bad flavor out. And only by chewing and chewing and chewing, talking and talking and talking and dealing with it, can you reach some point of stability. Does that ring true to you, doctor, that the role of talk in addition to everything else is just the power of that is reducing the intensity of the pain?
Yeah, I mean, we know that there are good evidence-based treatments to help post-traumatic stress. And one of the big ones is exposure, right? And that just sounds awful, right? To have to keep thinking about, talking about, listening to your own story. But we know that that is one of the best things. Now, we need a place for people to do that safely.
Yes.
And a place that will support people through that re-experiencing, through, over and over again. And that's what makes a lot of the treatment for this hard, right? It's not magic and it's not simple. But it's effective. There are good programs out there that can help people do this. And there are people out there who want to help others do this.
All right. So this is, you're teeing up the next question perfectly as we discuss programs and approaches and support. I'm going to go around the circle here. Let's start with Steve. Steve, if you're talking to some high-ranking Pentagon official about this issue of destigmatization, what would you counsel, suggest, push for that the military can do now that maybe hasn't been done historically or traditionally to address this issue of better mental health and destigmatizing people who are struggling?
Start in boot camp. Boot camp and the officer training. So get these guys when whether they're an officer or enlisted, when they're a boot, and start pinging them then and letting them know that hey, mental health, it's real, and we've got resources available. When I first came in, man, oh man, you did not talk about it. 1981, just on the heels of Vietnam. And if you talked or mentioned it, it's people ran away. They didn't want to talk about it. Hey, we don't talk about that stuff. And if you've got those kind of thoughts in your head, time for you to leave.
I think this, again, I want to underscore it just because when you have a conversation, there's so much stuff going on that it can fly by. I think this is a remarkable suggestion that changes things in a structural manner. Boot camp, from the beginning, change the perception so that it becomes a show of strength to say, I need some help in this regard. How though, Steve, I'm just curious, would that affect, like, I just picturing the headwinds you'd get from people saying, well, wait a minute, we are building warriors here. So that does introduce an element of sort of weakness. What do you say to that?
Recognizing the signs and being able to save your buddy. We all hear too many stories about people committing suicide because they just can't take it anymore. They don't know what's going on with them, and they just when you start to unravel and you start to have thoughts of suicide, you're not thinking clearly.
Mm.
And, you know, and the kind of the shame of this whole thing is that, like, traumatic brain injury and everything that's associated with traumatic brain injury, and, you know, which PTSD is one of those offshoots of TBI, it wasn't ever really brought about or recognized until the NFL brought it up, and guys with head trauma, right? Junior Seau shoots himself in the chest, commits suicide, and it really, I was living in San Diego at the time, and it just, boy, it brought it to the forefront. But up until that point, you know, you just didn't talk about it. You didn't, it wasn't part of the daily, I'm not saying make it part of dinner table discussion, but let's make it part of a normal discussion.
You know, to your point, Steve, one of the stories that affected me the most, moved me the most, and that quite honestly, I have some of the most pride about, we did a whole look at the VA last year, especially the New Orleans VA, which in my view has a shameful record of dealing with TBI. And the Veterans Administration must do a better job in recognizing and treating and not just giving meds, but dealing with things. I'll never understand until somebody can explain it to me why this doesn't become more of a national priority. I don't care how much money you spend. I don't care how much attention you give it. Until you can fix TBI therapies for the veterans who need them, I think we're failing as a culture.
When I went to the VA after my treatment at home base, my doctor asked me, he said, well, you know, why didn't you try to go through the VA for this program? And I said, because I don't think the VA could handle it. I don't think the VA could do a good job. And he asked me to expand on that. And so I just described to him the home base program. And I mean, the VA is always playing catch up. I mean, they're my primary care facilitator right now, but I don't have the faith in the VA to give me the treatment that I need, or they can't give me the same treatment that I got at home base.
Yes.
There's just no way.
And thank God for home base, but that's also in its own way a shameful statement. Tanya, I want to let you take a crack at this. You're talking to some high-ranking Pentagon official, and you are asked, you have a chance to ask the official some questions about what they can do about the issue of destigmatization. What points do you make to that official?
And before I answer that, I would also like to just kind of caveat what Steve was saying about, you know, the veterans, because I'm a living, walking, proud product of Emory Veterans Program. And I went to Emory's veteran program through that program because I needed to reclaim my life. And that's their motto, to reclaim your life. So to Steve's point, I would have to agree with him on that. And to your question, Jim, you mentioned it being a national, you know, we need to talk about this nationally. And I would agree with that, because I think, and again, it's just my perspective, that the stigma of mental illness is the same, could be in the same category as racism and sexism. So we have to erase those stigmas of mental illness, and we do that by, you know, making this a national effort, because people need to understand that, you know, we need to talk about it more and understand more about mental health, and recognize that this mental health and this condition is not a result of bad choices. It's not a result of somebody that they're crazy or they're violent or that they're a bad person. And if we talk about it more, I think it will be accepted more by people that we have this mental issue or mental condition, and you know, be a greater possibility that you know, that would improve our mental well-being and to help others understand us more.
Justin, JR, Justin first. Again, I just want to get your thoughts. I want everybody's thoughts on this notion of what would you say to a high-ranking official at the Pentagon about what needs to be done to reduce destigmatization and improve the mental health for people?
I would suggest to make it mandatory. When they come back from deployment, you go through it, obviously different levels based on what you experienced, what you've gone through. But that way, and I believe they do this in England, this is what I heard, that everyone goes through and sees the mental health doctor on their way through. So no one's special. There's no negative stigmatization by going and seeing a person because everyone has to. What happens next is confidential, and it goes from there. But that's what I recommend. Will it cost more money? Of course. Who cares? It's such an important issue.
Absolutely. JR?
I think we have to ask our leaders to incorporate a little bit of emotional intelligence, right? Being able to understand their own feelings, their own experiences, being able to understand the feelings and the experiences of the troops that they have within their unit that they're in command of, and to be able to kind of put themselves in that situation. I have a buddy of mine that did 19 years and constantly was just deployed, and constantly had TBI symptoms, not from a physical injury that sent him home and he spent a long amount of time in the hospital recovering, but just from constant explosions, constant assaults, constant, just a lot of just constant trauma. And I just think about if his leaders, when he constantly talked about the symptoms that he was experiencing, if they would have just paid attention to that and put the troop before the mission in many ways. And I understand the mission is important, but listen, I mean, I was 19 years old, Jim. I was fresh out of basic training and I was sent to combat. I did not have the training that I needed to go to combat. I did not have the life experience that I needed to go to combat. I remember being in Iraq and getting a briefing and being explained that if we're in a convoy and if somebody were to get in front of our Humvee, and strategically there are elements where people are trying to stop our Humvee so we become a target and we can become attacked. And so what do? I remember hearing one of my NCOs talk about, you don't stop. Can you imagine being 19 years old? You just got your driver's license a few years ago. And when you got your driver's license, the whole qualification was you had to understand the rules of a pedestrian to a vehicle. You were to stop. The pedestrian has the right of way. And now suddenly I have to restructure my mind and say, wait, no, I keep going. What does that mean? And I think leaders have to be able to come from a place of their heart, not just this mission, gotta drive on. I get it. But if we are able to take care of our service member and take care of the heart and the mind, I guarantee you physically, they will give you so much more. Jim, you've had the opportunity, and your colleagues as journalists have had the opportunity to interview troops that have been in the hospital recovering. What is the one thing every single one of those veterans say when they're, would you do it over? And they're like, I wish I can go back right now. I want to go back. That's the question I have for my doctors. They will do it again if you make them feel like they matter. Treat the heart, treat the mind before we start putting the mission before any. The mission should be taking care of every single son, daughter, husband, mother, father. You get what I'm saying?
It's one of the related points to what you're saying that I think is also very important, because we're dealing with, as you say, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I think it's also just becoming something we're aware of as a culture. You're not fully formed at 18. You're not sitting at your high school graduation. That brain continues to fluff and develop till you're 25, 26. I can see Dr. Iaccarino just sort of nodding her head. We are dealing with people whose brains are still in development. Doctor, you really seem to be honing in on this. I want to just bring you in for your comments.
Yeah, particularly for our male service members, we know that the brain is still, particularly those frontal lobes, those decision maker lobes, right? They are developing well into the late teens, early 20s. So I'll echo that. And I'll just say, I think the name of the game here is early intervention, right? We train medics to go out with teams, and they know how to start an IV. They know how to give you a shot of morphine. They probably know how to set some bones. Why isn't there a counterpart dealing with the day-to-day mental health trauma? Think of it as a foregone conclusion that psychological distress is going to happen to our soldiers. Embed mental health care. And I will say, I think, in talking to my counterparts in Naval Special Warfare, I know they've started that, right? Special Operations has started to say, we're going to embed mental health care. We're going to put mental health providers right next to our teams, not because we think that they're going to struggle psychologically, but because we know that if we provide them the support they need right away mentally, they will actually be stronger, better soldiers. They will perform better, right? So it's a preventative, proactive model, and not a waiting until somebody has severe symptoms and meets criteria for post-traumatic stress.
What I'm thinking of as you're talking, in October of 2011, I did a story in Iraq about how much the military learned about tourniquets. And from 2003 to 2011, this time in country allowed many more people to survive traumatic injury because everyone had become versed in the use of tourniquets. You're sort of suggesting mental health tourniquets, that there is, it just becomes standard operating procedure to make sure medics or everyone understands sort of the basics of providing a baseline mental health interface that allows more people literally to survive.
Yes.
That's great. That's good.
You know, Jim,
Yeah,
Jim,
JR.
if I may, this is JR. I just quickly, because I know we're going to move into Q&A shortly, but I want to make sure that I highlight as well individuals that are probably tuning in right now, or family members of individuals that have not had a physical injury, you know, that don't see themselves in me or in Justin, that maybe don't see themselves in Tanya or in Steve, right? These are individuals that maybe haven't deployed. I know there's a lot of people that haven't deployed. I know there's a lot of people that haven't endured, you know, a lot of the same experiences that us on this panel have experienced, but they still have their own trauma related to other things. Military sexual trauma is obviously a very important topic and something that we should be discussing as well. And so I just want to throw that out. And I also want to just say to everyone watching right now, because I believe this panel, I believe this discussion has the opportunity to save somebody's life. I truly believe that. And it may just be that one person. And I really believe that one person is then going to talk to somebody in 6 months from now, and they'll save that person's life. And it'll always be tied to this amazing panel that was put together in this conversation. But I need people to understand that, listen, you're not going to go back and try to, you know, be the normal person you were before everything happened, before everything you were exposed to. For the family member, for the loved one, for the service member going through it, for the veteran, it's about embracing that element, that part of you is no longer there, that you are a new person, that it's embracing this new identity, and then understanding there are all these incredible tools and resources that we're surrounded with within organizations and personnel and, or, you know, resources that are going to help you be able to create that identity. Take this foundation. You're not starting over. You already have a foundation. You're just essentially kind of bringing it down to the studs and then saying, I can build something else, but it's still going to be something that can be considered a home.
Yeah, and a beautiful home. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. All right, you're correct, JR. We are approaching about the last 10 minutes. And so we do want to get to some questions from the audience. I want to start with this one, and anybody can take this, just jump right in. We'll call this a jump ball. Question comes from an audience member to all panelists. How can we break down the barriers between branches with mental health? Why do the branches vary so much when it comes to getting help and the stigma of getting help? Anyone?
I just talked, so I'll let Steve.
No, you're up. Your picture's up.
And I'll let Steve go. Steve, go for it. Steve took himself off.
Steve, what do you got?
Thanks. You know, it's the services are always so different anyway when it comes to certain things, even medical care, and I think even, you know, healthcare and things like that. I know for, you know, just my small community that I lived in for so long, they finally realized that brain injury, traumatic brain injury from blast exposure. So from everything that we do with all types of, you name the explosive, shoulder fired rockets, things like that, guys were getting, you know, a lot of TBIs, and that was affecting behaviors, everyday behaviors, whether it be at home or whether it be on the battlefield. And so they mandated, the commander mandated Admiral Tim Szymanski, who is now the deputy commander of SOCOM, every 2 years. So that's the end of our cycle. So when the guys, by the time they come home from a deployment, that's the end of a 2-year cycle. They will get brain scans done. And if an anomaly shows, they get another brain scan, and they will then, depending on the outcome of that, depends on whether they reload back into a platoon or not. Along with that brain scan also comes a psychological well-being check with a psychologist, like Dr. Mary was talking about. They're beefing up the psychological field of to support the teams. So it's and I think sure it is going to be expensive, but so was war.
Good point. Really good point. Next question is really interesting. So this comes from a member of the audience who asks, how do you feel about having panelists with less extreme injuries experiences to highlight military life and combat experiences can affect us all, regardless of the number of deployments and or severity of those deployments? In other words, I think what this viewer is raising is we have these stories here, and we have this wonderful panel of people whose lives have been severely impacted. But we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking it's only those who've had traumatic injuries who have to deal with the mental health consequences just from serving. So, Tanya, can you talk to this at all?
Yes. And I appreciate that question, because I definitely understand where the viewer is coming from. What I think, because I was writing a few things down here, and you're right. So you got a various amount of people here, some seniors here, and different things of that nature. And I honestly, and I've said it before when I was serving on active duty, we have to get the junior soldiers, we have to get that level of people involved. We have to get some diversity in there, meaning the different types of mental health that we are dealing with, the different type of PTS or things we're dealing with, MST and different things like that. So we have to have, and I say confessions, but I always say sharing the story, and the seniors have to be willing to listen and to not, to be threatened that their careers are going to be in jeopardy, or, that they're going to be, kicked out of the Army. They're going to be stigmatized, meaning, put in another platoon or rehabilitated to another company or PCS to another unit. We've got to cut that crap out. It's a lot of great people that serve in the military, and sometimes we let something like this, just override everything else. And I'll tell you, a junior soldier that doesn't have the experience that myself or Steve or, JR or Justin has, where we can go out and get employment and find these things, that junior soldier is stuck, and they're just put back out on the street or just put back out here when they came to the military to change their lives and make a difference.
There's few things more powerful than hearing a command sergeant major say, cut that crap out.
Oh.
I love that. I love that, and I agree. All right, next question. And Justin, why don't you take a crack at this? The vast majority of mental health resources for vets are nonprofits. 22 Until None, Psych Hub. When do you think the military will adopt healthy, stigma-free programs to assist their service members?
That's a great question. I think you alluded to it already. I think it is shameful that we rely on nonprofits to do this incredible work. That means our government, our military is not paying for this effort. They're paying a lot of money to bring us into the military, to train us up for war, and to make sure we can succeed in our careers. But then why is it up to a nonprofit that only gets money through grants or from private donors paying for this? That's no way to, we wouldn't run a business that way. So I really appreciate the question. I have thought about that before. There are a lot of good groups out there to support. In fact, it can be overwhelming sometimes for a service member or a veteran to know where to go, because if you Google it, there are so many. but I think it would take commitment, serious commitment from senior leadership to just as Tanya and JR has said, to say, this is something that's truly important to us. We believe in the individual. We want to ensure everyone leaves the military better than when they came in here, body, mind, and spirit, and we're gonna make that a priority. I think a lot of people talk about it, but I don't think we're anywhere close to that right now.
So we have about 5 minutes left and we have 5 panelists. So I'm going to give everybody a minute. Closing thoughts. Steve, we're going to start with you. I want you to address this notion of stigma and what thought you would like to leave the audience with for veterans watching about dealing with stigma and mental health.
Don't let it drive you into the grave. Get help. And there's so many good programs out there. Home base was my program of choice. I know some veterans that have gone to other programs as well, in addition to home base. Home base was it for me, and they were fantastic. Take the leap, and it's a leap of faith, and they've got your back, man. They were there to do nothing but help you.
Take the leap. Tanya, closing thought?
Yes, thanks. I'll say that treatment is effective. Reach out and ask for help. And I will also say that the help that I seek was through, Wounded Warrior Project. As I mentioned, Wounded Warrior Talk and Emory Veterans Program. That's really it. Just to, that treatment is effective. Again, with that stigma, reach out for help, seek help, because it is effective.
Doctor?
Yeah, I think my final parting words would be don't wait. I hear so many people who come to my office and say, Doc, I'm not sure I should be here because I know there are people out there who are worse off than me. And the answer is that everybody deserves to have good mental health.
This
Everybody.
isn't relative. Right, exactly. This is absolute.
And you will know people who are worse off than you. And you might know people who you feel aren't so bad off as you, although maybe they're just looking like they're not so bad off. Don't try to guess, just come. Just reach out, come. We'll help you figure it out. We'll help you figure out what's going well, what's not going well, and then we'll tell you how you can make it better. I make it sound simple. I know it's not, but don't wait to reach out.
Sometimes you gotta put it almost in a message that would fit on a bumper sticker. We'll help you figure it out. We will. We'll help you figure it out. Justin?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I would like my comment, not just to veterans. I know we're talking about the military, but on a broader scale, I don't want people in America to think mental health is a military issue. And right now, I think a lot of people do because of movies like Rambo or other things in the media. This is a nationwide issue, and we know that we're just a tiny slice of America. And so if we can get it right, and if we can show that we're comfortable asking for help, like Tanya's talking about, and showing that it's a sign of strength, asking for help and engaging in our own well-being, I think we can, as veterans in the military, lead in this across the country. And we've already led in integration and other parts of American society. So there is an opportunity for us to be leaders, but it is a nationwide issue.
It's an opportunity. Absolutely. JR, I'm going to give you the last word here, bud.
Thank you, Jim. Again, I just want to say it's a pleasure to be a part of this panel. I am truly inspired by everybody that has shared and has been willing to be vulnerable in every element of their experience. I applaud every single one of you. I think the biggest thing I want to say to every service member, to every veteran, to every family member that's out there, you are not alone. And you cannot do this alone. As the doctor was saying, I have personally gone to therapy. I still think about I should go to therapy, and not necessarily things related to what transpired 18 years ago, but just life things that just resurface all the time that actually are triggers that makes me realize and pay attention. Oh, I dealt with this part of my life and my recovery, but I didn't deal with this part apparently because it still affected me. You can't do it alone. Reach out. There's a lot of incredible people that are willing to unconditionally show up and love you and support you. And like Movember said, right? Alec, that's one of their programs, Alec. Ask, listen, encourage, and check in. And that is the best thing that all of us can do, especially not only in the military space, but in the civilian space. We all need to be willing to ask, to listen, to encourage, and check in with one another. So let's all do a better job. And when somebody asked on a panel, how can we civilians do a better job? I leave you with this. Less than 1% serve in our military. So that leads a vast majority of the population that have no connection to the military. For somebody else that asked the question, how did we get the military to implement these programs? We need the 99% of the country that has no connection to the military to actually say this subject matters to us, even though we may not have a connection to it. It matters to us. So we're going to use social media. We're going to use our resources. We're going to use our organizations to actually raise awareness and put pressure on the military, to put pressure on the VA and say there needs to be accountability. There needs to be better programs. And we, the 99% that are not wearing the uniform, are actually going to hold you accountable, because the less than 1%, our voices don't always reach the top. When there's presidential debates, when there's interviews, when there's discussions, veterans issues aren't always brought up. We need the 99%. So if you're watching right now and you're a civilian, you're asking yourself, well, what can I do? You got some homework.
Awesome. Very important closing thoughts. So JR and Tanya, Alexis, Justin, Steve, thank you does not begin to cover it. I want to express our gratitude for your presence here tonight, to be sure, but for your service. I don't know any other way to put it other than to say we are all in your debt and want to continue to be a strong support system for you and the entire community of veterans to whom we all owe so very much. Thank you for your presence here tonight. Thanks everyone for watching. Everyone, have a wonderful night.
Love to you all.